with us on 365 Sports. Ross, thank you very much for your time. So, fight over college football playoff future, messy, etc. No one likes it. So, what does that actually, in your opinion, mean for the future?
Well, we don't really know, right? The four power conference commissioners will meet again soon, probably within the next week or so. And as I wrote in there, the Big 12 and ACC will potentially propose an alternate model, an alternate format to the one that the Big 10 and SEC is supporting, which, as we all know, I know I've been on your show before to discuss it, the 4-4-2-2-1 model, which is 4 automatic qualifiers each for the Big 10 and SEC, 2 each for the ACC and Big 12, 1 for the best group of 6 champion, and then probably 3 at large. That gives you a 16-team field. So the ACC and Big 12 have made it very clear, and I just got back from ACC spring meetings in Amelia Island, Florida, and where it was made clear that they think they deserve a 3rd automatic qualifier, and I think the Big 12 feels the same way. So is there a way they could get a 3rd automatic qualifier? That is kind of the question, and that's what the 4 commissioners will have to discuss. But looming over all this, obviously, is the fact that the Big 10 and SEC, through a new agreement signed last year, control playoff format. So ultimately, they are the deciders.
So, Ross, you mentioned that they both want kind of the same thing, but I've never gotten the impression that they're walking in lockstep either, though, the Big 12 and ACC.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We haven't necessarily seen them sort of working together, and certainly not in the way the Big 10 and the SEC have been working together. We certainly have seen them have joint AD meetings, several joint AD meetings. Their commissioners have met together separately too. So we've seen a lot of that from the Big 10 and SEC. We haven't seen that as much from the Big 10 or Big 12 and ACC, but maybe that's this is something that ignites that between the two leagues. But I think they're on this issue. They're going to have to come up with some kind of alternate proposal. It would seem, or the Big 10 and SEC plan to go forward with the 4-4-2-2-1 model to start next year.
Yeah, so as you point out, Ross, that they can fight back or come up with alternates, but ultimately it's really not even in their control. So to what extent do you feel like the Big 10 and SEC are even listening, and what is, I guess, just for the greater good of college football, that they're entertaining potentially alternate proposals, and the Big 12 and ACC having some say in matters?
Yeah, we don't really know. I know, as you probably read in my story yesterday, right now there's certainly a political pushback on the CFB format that the Big 10 and SEC are proposing. You have it from the public, and also from politicians, and starting to roll in. And so you wonder if that pushback will sort of change their stance on how the Big 10 and SEC handle things moving forward. As the political pressures, we have to remember that, the Big 10 and SEC have been up here to Washington fairly often recently, lobbying for help from lawmakers. And this playoff format certainly disadvantages certain segments of the country, and that has to be, taken into account when you look at the lobbying effort from those two leagues, in other leagues as well, but the lobbying effort on Capitol Hill. So, I think probably the best chance for this thing to derail in some way is just one of two things happening, right? It's either they're going to accept the Big 12 or ACC's alternate proposal, which we don't really know what that might be, but certainly it's some way in whatever is proposed, it would give the ACC or and the Big 12 a third automatic qualifier under certain conditions, maybe under the rankings. Or in the second way that this thing could be derailed is with just perception, the public pushback and the political pushback.
Ross, why? I mean, why would I guess they're saying 3 so they can get up from 2. But
is that for both conferences or 5 for the 2?
So my question being, why would they not at least publicly say, just the conference champions and no guaranteed total number of automatic qualifiers like 4 or 3 or 2 or whatever?
At Game Time, we revel in life's impromptu moments, like cheering on your hometown team at a Friday night baseball game or dancing the night away at an intimate concert. So we built a ticket marketplace that makes it faster and easier to get into your favorite events at a moment's notice. Discover incredible live experiences, real-time price drops, see your seat view, instant checkout, mobile tickets, and best of all, Game Time ticket coverage. Score the best deals on great seats with Game Time.
Why? That to me would be the better argument, because you're saying you're going to have to skip over some teams in certain years to put a 4th Big Ten or SEC team in.
Well, I think the SEC and Big Ten, it's been a while, but I've written a little bit about why in the past, just why they've come up with the multiple automatic bids. And really it goes to the fact that the Big Ten and SEC want certain guaranteed access spots so they can do a few things. Number one is schedule in the non-conference bigger games. Right now, I think you're seeing big non-conference games. Administrators are avoiding them for fear that a loss would keep you out of the CFP, right? And the same goes for the SEC's conversation around playing 9 conference games. They haven't done it partly because, a loss, right, in a 9th game could keep them out of the CFP. So if you have automatic access, guaranteed access, you can do those things, play more non-conference games, play nine SEC games. And then you could play if you play 9 SEC games, the Big Ten currently plays 9 conference games. Then if each league is playing the same amount of conference games, then you could reach an agreement, what they've talked about for several months now, in a Big Ten SEC scheduling agreement where they play each other every year in at least one non-conference game. There's a 4th reason, and there's probably a 5th reason too, of why they want automated, guaranteed access to with these automatic qualifiers, and that is to be able to hold play-in games, as I wrote about in that story, where you'd have play-in games on conference championship weekend. So I'll give you an example of how that might work. If the SEC and Big Ten each gets 4 automatic qualifiers, their top 2 would potentially play in a championship game and both go on to the CFP. But their number 3 in the standings may play their number 6 in their standings in a play-in game on campus on conference championship weekend. The same with their 4th place in the standings will play the 5th place team, and that would be a play-in game for their other 2 automatic qualifiers. And then the 5th reason I think they want to do this is they want to, specifically the Big Ten, wants to basically diminish the authority and subjectiveness of the selection committee.
By having those play-in games, and with the play-in game losers, wouldn't they then be at-large bids?
They could. It just depends on how big the at-large pool is. In a 4-4-2-2-1 16-team bracket, there's 3 at-large, and one of those is protected for Notre Dame if it finishes inside the top 16. Notre Dame would get one of those at-large spots kind of automatically. And so you'd have 2 at-larges. But if there's some kind of compromise reached where it's more of a 4-4-3-3-2, or I'm sorry, a 4-4-3-3-1, like where the Big 12 and ACC get, a third automatic qualifier in some way or some conditional way, you could have as little as 1, right, at large. So the playing games would be real playoff type of games. But you're right. The loser of the Big Ten and SEC play-in games could conceivably get an at-large spot, but it just depends on what happens to that at-large pool.
So going back to something you said, they want to lessen the effectiveness of the committee. So why are they afraid of that? The committee loves them.
Well, they would say the SEC would disagree with you on that after this year or after this past year's bracket, right? They would say that, that SMU, for instance, got in, right, and got beat pretty bad on the road at Penn State. Clemson got in automatically and got beat pretty bad on the road at Texas. Indiana got beat pretty bad at Notre Dame. And so they would say that instead of those teams getting in, their team should have got in, like South Carolina, Ole Miss, Alabama. That is their argument. Again, not my argument, but that is their argument, that the selection committee is too subjective. It's hard to separate these teams, and there needs to be more automated access like you get in the NFL.
Ross, so what was kind of the reactions, and I don't know how much you had a chance to talk about this with everybody, but just sort of what was the buzz about the presidential commission and the idea and just kind of the thoughts behind that and what that could be moving forward?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. The president's involvement is always something that it certainly gets traction and attention on an issue. I don't know what the power of a commission is, though. I don't know. They can direct Congress, obviously, to do things. They can recommend things to Congress. But a lot of these concepts and these changes that they're talking about making have to go through Congress, and so you still have to involve Congress in that. But it is going to be interesting as this thing is formulated. Who's on it and what role they will play. We just don't know a lot about it right now.
Committees meet and they meet and they meet. But Ross, how many actually ever get anything truly done?
Yeah, it seems like lately a lot of committee meetings don't produce a whole lot of decisions, and we've certainly seen that quite often. And I'm sure we'll continue to to see that as we go forward. The House settlement and the fact that it hasn't been approved yet is really, really, honestly, like holding up a lot of decisions. And I think once the settlement is approved, which could come probably as soon as next week, the NCAA will file either today or tomorrow its final briefing with the judge, and then it's in the judge's hands, any decision. And so we could have a decision probably, within the next 5 to 7 days, I would guess, at most 10 days, I would guess, from the judge on if this settlement is approved or not. And after that, we'll probably get more answers and more decisions on things.
Ross, I have one more question. You mentioned earlier about blowback or political pressure or, the Big Ten and the SEC. Do they feel that? I mean, do they feel that? Do they have any pressure from that? Or do they really care that they're too big for even that to bother them?
Yeah, I don't really know. That's a question probably to start with for the commissioners and some of the athletic directors and school presidents, and maybe we'll find out more on that this month. The Big Ten's conference meetings are next week in outside of Los Angeles, and the SEC meetings are the next week in Destin, Florida. I'll be at the SEC meetings, and we'll maybe find out how much they're feeling the pressure, or if they're feeling the pressure at all.
Ross, do you think that the House settlement, they've come back with people can phase in the roster limits if they want to? Is that if they want to going to make them have to go back and do this again?
Yeah, the optional part of that. The argument from the NCAA, and I don't, I think it's actually a fairly good one, is right now roster spots are not guaranteed. Scholarships are guaranteed, but roster spots are not. And so why in this new era should roster spots be guaranteed? It should be optional for the school like it is now. So that was their argument in responses to the judge's concerns. We'll see what she says. It's certainly not in the business of predicting federal judges and how they'll rule. But she, I think a lot of people within college athletics agree that the judge will not blow up this settlement, something that brings as much as $20 billion to most of minority athletes over the next 10 years, that she will not blow up a settlement over this issue. She's asked them to revise it. They've revised it, maybe not exactly to the liking of many objectors of the settlement, but they have revised it to make it permissible for schools to grandfather in. But you're right, they didn't make it mandatory, and it's not mandatory now, and so that's kind of what they're leaning on.
Your last thing today, and you had you had a report about the NIL clearinghouse, NIL go, and all of what that means. And you'd written about this back in February. A lot of times these things are up there, and you had written about them a month or two beforehand, and you always kind of go back to that. What was the information based on what you reported earlier today in the NIL clearinghouse? Anything that kind of against the wall that sticks?
Yeah, not really. You're right. There was a lot of information filtered out of the House Implementation Committee back in January, February. They had a lot of meetings, and I was able to gather some information and report a lot of the details that are now coming out a little more publicly. It's really, the document that I put out there is really in the weeds on a lot of stuff. But the gist is there will be an NIL clearinghouse, and all third-party NIL deals that players strike with boosters, brands, businesses will have to go through this clearinghouse. And those with boosters or any other affiliated entity, including corporate sponsors, will be handled more strictly by Deloitte, a company running the clearinghouse, and these deals could be denied. And there's an appeals process that offers athletes if these deals are denied. And all of this is a goal to put the toothpaste, you might say, back in the tube, to cut out and eliminate a lot of the phony booster deals kind of that we see now that really aren't NIL deals, but are masquerading sort of as NIL deals. The problem with this, obviously, is the toothpaste is out of the tube. So putting it back is very difficult and could lead to more legal challenges for the NCAA in the power conferences.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate it, buddy. Appreciate your time when you give it to us. Ross Dellenger, Yahoo Sports, with us on 365 Sports.